The day began like any other for the man at the center of this story. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't stressed, and he didn't expect anything unusual to happen. He had just finished picking up a few groceries from a small local market and was ready to head home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft colors, and the street felt calm and familiar. Nothing about this moment hinted at what was about to unfold. He walked toward his car with the grocery bag held carefully in one hand. As he opened the door, he heard a vehicle roll up behind him. At first, he didn't think much of it. The parking lot was open to everyone, and it wasn't unusual for cars to pass through. But when he closed his door and buckled his seatbelt, he noticed the reflection of red and blue lights bouncing off the glass. He froze for a moment, unsure if the lights were meant for him. Maybe the police car was just driving by. Maybe they were heading somewhere else. But within seconds, an officer stepped out of the patrol car and began walking toward him. He sighed softly, though not in anger, more in confusion. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't sped. He hadn't ignored any signs. His car was in good condition, and his papers were always up to date. Still, he rolled down his window and waited, trying to stay calm. The officer approached with a polite but firm tone. He asked for the usual things: license, registration, and details about what the man was doing in the area. The man handed everything over without hesitation and explained that he had just finished shopping. The officer nodded but didn't seem convinced. He kept glancing around the parking lot as if expecting to find something out of place. More police cars arrived one by one. What started as a simple stop began to feel unusual. The man looked around, wondering why so many officers were suddenly involved. Bystanders inside the market looked through the glass windows, curious but unsure of what was going on. The man took a deep breath. He knew staying calm was the best thing he could do. He didn't raise his voice or act upset. He just asked gently if something had happened, or if there was some misunderstanding. The officer didn't give a clear answer. Instead, he muttered something about routine checks and stepped away to speak with the other officers. Minutes passed slowly. The man could feel the pressure building. His heart wasn't racing, but there was a tightness in his chest. The kind that appears when you're trapped in a moment you don't fully understand. It wasn't fear, more like a quiet frustration mixed with uncertainty. The officers continued talking near their cars, occasionally glancing in his direction. The man wondered if someone had reported something suspicious or mistaken him for someone else. But no one said anything directly to him, and the silence made the situation feel heavier than it should have. A few people in the parking lot began recording on their phones. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way people react when they see something unusual involving police. The man wished they wouldn't film him, but he also understood why they might feel the need to. No one knew what was happening. Confusion often draws attention. One of the officers returned to the window and asked him several more questions. Some of them seemed unrelated to the situation: questions about where he lived, how long he had been in the area, and even if he had spoken to anyone inside the market. The man answered honestly, though he didn't understand why any of it mattered. His voice stayed steady, even though inside he felt a swirl of emotions. What bothered him most wasn't the officers themselves. It was the feeling of being judged for something he didn't even know about. He kept replaying his day in his mind, trying to spot anything unusual. But everything had been ordinary. Completely ordinary. The officers moved back toward their cars again. They weren't aggressive, but they weren't acting like this was just a small misunderstanding either. The man could sense their tension, and tension has a way of spreading. Even people passing by could feel that something didn't add up. A few more minutes went by, long and slow, as if time itself had decided to stretch. The man tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel, trying not to let the growing stress show. He didn't want to appear impatient. He didn't want to make the officers think he was irritated. He wanted everything to go smoothly. Finally, one officer walked closer again. But before he reached the car, his radio crackled. He stepped aside to listen. The man couldn't hear what was being said, but he noticed how the officer's entire posture changed. It wasn't fear or alarm, more like surprise. The officer nodded a few times, then returned to the group. They all looked around the parking lot again, as if expecting someone new to arrive. And that's when the man saw another vehicle pull in. This one wasn't a regular patrol car. It had a different design, a different style of lights, and carried a sense of authority even before the door opened. The officers straightened up the moment they saw it. Their tone shifted. Their movements became sharper, more controlled. The man could tell immediately that someone important had arrived. He didn't know who it was yet, but he sensed the atmosphere changing. The bystanders who had been filming lowered their phones slightly, whispering to each other. A couple of the officers quickly walked toward the newly arrived vehicle, their expressions serious but respectful. The man watched closely, unsure what to expect. He felt a mix of relief and worry. Relief because it seemed like the situation might finally be explained. Worry because he didn't understand why someone of higher authority would need to be here for a simple encounter. As the door opened, he saw a figure step out, someone with a strong, confident presence and a uniform that clearly showed rank. The officers greeted the newcomer with a level of respect that made it obvious who they were. The police chief had arrived, and in that single moment, the entire situation shifted from an ordinary encounter to something far more serious, and far more unexpected than the man could have ever predicted. The arrival of the police chief changed everything. The man sitting in his car felt an immediate shift in the energy around him. The officers who had been handling the situation carefully, but tensely, now straightened up even more. Their movements precise and deliberate. The chief didn't rush. He walked slowly and deliberately toward the group, his presence commanding attention without any need for loud words. The man couldn't help but notice the calm authority he exuded, the kind that made people listen even before they spoke. The chief stopped just a few feet from the man's car. He looked at the officers, then at the man, taking in the scene quietly. There was no anger, no judgment in his eyes, just a sharp awareness of what was happening. He gestured subtly to one of the officers to step aside, and the officer obeyed immediately. The man felt a flicker of relief. Perhaps this meant the situation would finally be clarified. The chief spoke, his voice calm but firm, asking the officers to explain what had happened. One by one, they described the situation, the routine stop, the questions, the minor confusion, and the uncertainty that had built up over the last few minutes. The chief listened carefully, nodding occasionally, absorbing every detail without interruption. The man noticed how his presence alone seemed to change the officers. Where moments before there had been hesitation and tension, now there was respect and focus. Finally, the chief turned his attention to the man. He asked simple questions, questions meant to understand rather than accuse. Where had he been? What had he been doing? Why was he in the area? The man answered honestly, explaining his errands, the short stop at the store, and the routine drive home. The chief listened without interruption, letting him speak fully. And that simple act of listening made the man feel seen in a way he hadn't in the last tense minutes, while the chief was speaking with him. The man noticed the other officers standing back, watching closely. Their expressions had softened, and some even looked a bit embarrassed. They realized that what had started as a simple encounter had been handled in a way that could have escalated, if not for the chief's presence. The man felt a mix of emotions: relief that the situation wasn't getting worse, curiosity about how things would resolve, and a quiet respect for the way the chief conducted himself. The chief asked the man to remain in his car for a few more moments. While he spoke privately with the officers, the man watched as the chief discussed the situation with them, listening and offering guidance in a tone that was both commanding and calm. The officers nodded, some taking notes, others simply listening carefully. It was clear that the chief was not just giving orders, but also teaching, making sure that every officer understood what had gone wrong and how to handle similar situations better in the future. Minutes passed slowly, but the man didn't feel the same tension as before. Instead, he felt a sense of order returning. He realized that even though the situation had felt overwhelming, there was a reason for the chief's involvement. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about ensuring fairness, professionalism, and respect for everyone involved. He appreciated the fact that someone at such a high level cared enough to step in personally, The chief returned to the man's car after a short while. He smiled slightly, not in a condescending way, but in a reassuring way, the kind of smile that puts people at ease. He explained calmly what had happened. There had been a misunderstanding. The officers had followed procedures, but the situation had been misread, and the man had been caught in an unusual combination of circumstances. He assured him that everything was now clear and that there would be no further action taken against him. Hearing this, the man felt a wave of relief wash over him. The tension that had been building inside him slowly melted away. He thanked the chief, feeling genuinely grateful not only for the resolution but also for the way the chief had handled everything. There was no harshness, no unnecessary pressure, just clear communication and understanding. The chief spent a few more moments speaking with the man, offering advice on how to handle similar situations in the future. Simple tips about staying calm and cooperative without feeling intimidated. The man listened attentively, realizing how rare it was to receive such thoughtful guidance from someone in such a powerful position. It wasn't just about avoiding trouble. It was about building mutual respect and understanding between law enforcement and the community. As the chief turned to leave, the man noticed something remarkable. Even though the situation had started with confusion and tension, it had ended with a sense of calm and learning. The officers, now standing with relaxed shoulders and attentive expressions, seemed to carry a new respect for the citizen and a renewed commitment to handling similar situations better. The man watched as the chief's vehicle drove away, feeling the gravity of what had just happened. Bystanders, who had been quietly observing, began to murmur among themselves. Some were impressed, some curious, but all recognized that what they had just witnessed was unusual. A simple encounter had turned into a moment of leadership and professionalism that would stick in their minds. The man smiled to himself, realizing that this would be a story he would share for years to come, not as something dramatic or frightening, but as a reminder of how calm, authority, and careful listening can transform even the most tense situations. He started his car slowly, glancing back at the officers who now waved politely. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of acknowledgement and respect. The man drove home in a quiet state of reflection. He thought about how easily ordinary moments can become stressful and how important it is for people in positions of authority to step in at the right time. He understood in a deeper way the human side of law enforcement, the mistakes that can happen, and the care it takes to handle them properly. As he pulled into his driveway, the man realized that what had happened today would stay with him, not as a source of fear or frustration, but as a reminder that even in the ordinary, routine moments, unexpected lessons can appear. The world, he thought, as a way of showing people both their vulnerability and the presence of good leadership in the same instant. And sometimes it takes just one calm, authoritative figure to turn confusion into clarity, tension into learning, and an ordinary encounter into something truly memorable. After the police chief had stepped in and left, the man thought the encounter was finally over. He felt a deep sense of relief, believing that the worst had passed and that he could now return to the quiet of his evening. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Just as he started his car and prepared to leave, one of the officers approached him again. This time there was a different energy. It wasn't tense or confrontational, but it carried a sense of careful purpose. The officer asked him to step out of his car. The man complied, feeling a small flicker of apprehension, though he reminded himself to stay calm. After all, everything had been clarified by the chief. There was no reason to fear. The officer guided him a short distance away from the car, speaking softly, explaining that they just needed a few more details to finalize the report. The man nodded, trying to follow the instructions carefully, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow. Nearby, a few bystanders who had been watching the earlier interaction lingered, curious about what was happening now. They kept their distance, whispering quietly among themselves. The man didn't mind. He knew that in moments like these, people's curiosity is natural. What he did mind was the nagging thought that even small, ordinary actions could suddenly feel monumental under the watchful eyes of others. As he spoke with the officer, he realized that the questions being asked now were different. They were more detailed, more precise, less about what he had done, and more about understanding the full context of his actions. The officer asked about the route he had taken, about how long he had been in the area, and about any interactions he might have had during the day. The man answered honestly, carefully explaining every small detail. Realizing that this level of scrutiny, while unusual, was meant to ensure accuracy and fairness, he noticed the professionalism in the officer's approach. There was no judgment in the voice, no tone of accusation. Instead, there was a quiet insistence on understanding, patience that made it clear the situation was not about blame, but about clarity. The man appreciated that, even though he still felt the weight of attention on him. The presence of others nearby, the subtle glances from people passing through, and the faint hum of traffic created a backdrop that made everything feel more intense than it should have been. While the officer spoke, the man's mind wandered back to the arrival of the chief. He remembered how the chief's calm presence had shifted the entire atmosphere, and he found himself wondering how many moments like this happened every day, small misunderstandings that could escalate. If someone with authority didn't intervene at just the right time, it made him feel grateful, not just for the chief, but for all the people who quietly guide situations toward fairness and understanding without. Drawing attention to themselves, the officer returned to the police car briefly. Speaking with someone over the radio, the man waited patiently, observing the way the officers moved and communicated. Even in routine procedures, there was a rhythm to their actions, a sequence of steps designed to prevent mistakes and ensure that nothing was overlooked. He realized that what had felt sudden and intense a few minutes ago was actually a reflection of careful planning and training. When the officer came back, he handed the man a form to review. It was a simple document, summarizing the encounter and including spaces for additional notes. The man read through it slowly, making sure everything was accurate. There were minor details to correct, things like the time he had arrived and the sequence of events. The officer waited patiently as he went line by line, explaining his corrections. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, a chance to contribute to the accuracy of the record, and ensure that his side of the story was represented clearly as they worked through the paperwork. The man noticed the subtle interactions between the officers. They weren't just following procedure mechanically. They were listening to each other, consulting quietly, and confirming details to make sure that nothing was misunderstood. It was a reminder that even when situations seem routine, the human element, attention, care, and communication plays a critical role in how events unfold. After completing the form, the man was asked to return to his car. He did so, feeling lighter, though still reflective. The weight of the encounter had shifted from tension to thoughtfulness. He realized that in the span of just a few minutes, he had experienced a range of emotions: confusion, frustration, relief, curiosity, and respect. Each emotion had layered on top of the last, creating an experience far richer than a simple traffic stop or a routine check could suggest. The officers thanked him for his cooperation. Speaking in a tone that was professional but also warm, they acknowledged the patience he had shown and the clarity with which he had answered their questions. The man smiled quietly, recognizing the human effort behind their words. They were doing their jobs, yes, but they were also navigating an unpredictable situation with care and attention. That mattered, and he wanted them to know he appreciated it, even after he started the car again. He couldn't shake the feeling that the evening had left a mark on him. He drove slowly, reflecting on the unusual progression of events. The arrival of the chief, the detailed questioning, the careful attention of the officers, it all felt like a lesson in human interaction and professional responsibility. He thought about how easily ordinary moments can become stressful and how critical it is to have people in positions of authority who understand the value of calm guidance. As he approached the main road, he noticed how ordinary the world seemed outside of his personal experience. Cars passed by, people walked along sidewalks, and the sun dipped lower in the sky. It was as if nothing had happened, yet he knew that for him, everything had changed. His perspective on encounters with law enforcement, the nature of authority, and the importance of patience and communication had shifted subtly but permanently. He parked in front of his home, gathering his groceries and taking a deep breath. The events of the evening would stay with him, not as a source of fear or anxiety, but as a reminder that even routine encounters can carry unexpected lessons. He realized that human behavior, both on his part and the part of others, shaped the outcome as much as any rules or procedures. Respect, patience, and careful listening had turned what could have been a stressful experience into something instructive, even memorable, as he entered his home. He reflected quietly on the officers, the chief, and the bystanders who had witnessed the unfolding events. Everyone had played a part, whether they realized it or not. He felt a sense of connection to the broader community and a newfound respect for the delicate balance of responsibility, authority, and human understanding. The encounter had started as a simple routine, but it had transformed into a story of awareness, patience, and the impact of thoughtful leadership. Sitting down with a cup of tea, he allowed himself to relax fully for the first time since the encounter began. He thought about the lessons hidden in everyday life, the moments that reveal character, and the power of calm authority to shape experiences. He knew he would remember this day for a long time, not as a moment of fear or confusion, but as an example of how ordinary events can become meaningful when handled with care, attention, and human understanding. The next day, the man woke up feeling a mix of relief and curiosity. Even though the encounter with the officers had been resolved, it lingered in his mind. He thought about the way the police chief had stepped in and how calm, collected, and observant he had been. The chief's presence had changed everything in an instant, turning a situation that could have become tense into something fair and understandable. He remembered the small details, the way the officers had straightened up as soon as the chief arrived, the careful way questions had been asked, and the calm, patient listening that had made him feel respected. These details didn't feel like small moments anymore. They had a weight, a meaning that only became clear after stepping back and thinking about the events. He realized that leadership, in its quietest form, had the power to change experiences for everyone involved. Later in the morning, he decided to visit the local police station, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity and a desire to understand. He wanted to see the human side of the people who had been involved in the encounter and perhaps gain a clearer perspective on what had happened. He wasn't nervous anymore, just thoughtful. He knew he had been treated fairly, and he wanted to acknowledge that in person. When he arrived at the station, the atmosphere felt different from the parking lot. It was calmer, controlled, and orderly. He was greeted politely by the front desk officer, who recognized him from the previous day. After a brief explanation, he was invited to speak with one of the senior officers who had been present during the encounter. The senior officer welcomed him warmly, asking if he had any questions or concerns. The man appreciated the invitation. It made him feel like his voice mattered and that his experience was valued. He asked about the procedures that led to the detailed questioning. Wanting to understand why things had escalated in such a way, the officer explained that even routine stops involve a balance of caution and fairness. Misunderstandings can happen quickly, especially when officers must respond to potential risks while also respecting the rights of the public. The man listened carefully. Realizing how complex the job could be and how important it was for officers to remain professional and observant at all times, the officer then spoke about the chief's involvement. He explained that the chief had a habit of personally reviewing situations where there was any potential for misunderstanding or escalation. The goal was not to punish, but to guide, teach, and ensure that both citizens and officers felt respected. The man thought about how much difference one person's calm presence could make. It wasn't just about authority. It was about understanding human behavior and leading with fairness. After the conversation, the man was invited to see the officers who had been involved. They were polite, respectful, and even a bit relieved to see him in good spirits. They thanked him for remaining calm and cooperative during the encounter. The man smiled, realizing that acknowledgement went both ways. He appreciated their professionalism, and they appreciated his patience. It was a simple but powerful exchange of human respect, one that left a lasting impression on everyone involved. Before leaving the station, the man spoke briefly with another officer about how ordinary moments, like a routine traffic stop or a neighborhood check, could carry hidden lessons. The officer agreed, noting that even the smallest interactions could teach patience, communication, and understanding. The man nodded, thinking back to the way the chief had handled the situation. The chief had modeled these lessons, turning what could have been a stressful event into an example of how authority and empathy can work together. Driving home, he reflected on the ripple effects of the encounter. He thought about the bystanders who had witnessed it, the officers who had participated, and himself. Each person had experienced the same situation differently, yet each had learned something valuable. He felt grateful for the chance to observe human behavior in such a raw and instructive way. He realized that life often presents small moments that can teach bigger lessons. If people are willing to notice and reflect, later that afternoon he decided to take a walk in his neighborhood. As he strolled along familiar streets, he noticed neighbors exchanging greetings. Some smiling, others absorbed in their own routines. The encounter from the previous day felt like a small but meaningful thread in the fabric of community life. He thought about the importance of calm leadership, fairness, and patience, not just in law enforcement, but in everyday interactions with friends, family, and neighbors. The man also began to think about the officers themselves. He realized that their jobs were often challenging in ways most people don't see. They face uncertainty, tension, and potential danger, and yet they are expected to remain professional, observant, and fair. Seeing the chief step in had reminded him that even trained professionals benefit from guidance, mentoring, and leadership. Everyone, in a way, is learning and growing, whether they are officers or citizens. As the day went on, he shared the story with a few friends and family members. Not in a dramatic way, but as an example of how small encounters can carry meaningful lessons. He described the calm authority of the chief, the professionalism of the officers, and the importance of patience and communication. Those who listened were struck by the story, appreciating the human side of law enforcement and the value of observing, understanding, and staying calm in tense moments. By evening, the man sat quietly in his living room, reflecting on the experience. He thought about how ordinary encounters could quickly become extraordinary when handled with awareness and care. The chief had shown that leadership is not just about making decisions or enforcing rules, it's about listening. It's observing and guiding others in ways that preserve dignity and respect for everyone involved. The man realized that he had witnessed something rare, a perfect balance of authority, empathy, and human understanding in action. He also considered the impact the encounter might have on the officers. They had seen firsthand how a calm, experienced leader could prevent escalation and teach through action rather than reprimand. The man felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his cooperation and calmness had contributed to that lesson. It was a reminder that everyone's actions, even small ones, have consequences and can influence the behavior of others. As night fell, he looked out the window at the quiet streets of his neighborhood. The lights of houses glimmered softly, and the hum of distant traffic created a peaceful background. He felt a deep sense of closure. What had begun as a routine encounter that could have ended poorly had transformed into a story of understanding, human connection, and leadership. It was a day he would remember, not for fear or tension, but for insight, respect, and the reminder that calm and fairness can guide even the most challenging situations. Before going to bed, he made a mental note to carry the lessons he had learned into his everyday life: patience in frustrating moments, understanding in uncertain situations, and the recognition that calm guidance can make a profound difference. The encounter had left him with more than a story. It had left him with a perspective on life, people, and leadership that he would carry forward. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt a quiet gratitude for the way the events had unfolded. The police chief's intervention, the officer's professionalism, and his own calm response had all combined to turn a routine encounter into a powerful lesson in humanity. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, both small and large, but he felt better equipped to face them with patience, awareness, and respect for those around him. The days after the encounter moved, slowly, but carried a quiet sense of change for the man. Life had returned to its usual rhythm: work, errands, the small routines that filled daily hours, but the experience of the past few days lingered in his mind. He thought about the moment the police chief had stepped in, the way the officers had responded, and the lessons hidden in what had seemed like a simple routine stop. It was strange how ordinary moments could become extraordinary. Without warning, he found himself reflecting often on the chief's presence. It wasn't just that the chief had authority or rank. It was the calm way he had observed, the patience with which he had listened, and the respect he had shown for everyone involved. The man realized that leadership like that was rare. Most people see authority as power or control, but the chief had shown that true leadership is also about understanding, guidance, and the careful management of human behavior. One afternoon, he decided to visit a nearby cafe to think more clearly. Sitting by the window, he watched people pass by, neighbors greeting each other, children running along the sidewalk, cars moving slowly down the street. Everything looked ordinary, yet he saw layers he hadn't noticed before. Each person was navigating their own routines, small challenges, and interactions. The encounter with the police had reminded him of the importance of patience, attention, and understanding in every moment, no matter how simple it seemed. He thought back to the officers involved in his encounter. They had been professional and respectful, but they were human. They made judgments, asked questions, and sought clarity. The chief had reminded them and him of the importance of perspective. He realized that everyone has moments where decisions must be made under uncertainty, and that how those decisions are handled shapes experiences in ways that last far beyond the moment. As he sipped his coffee, he considered how small acts of calm and fairness could ripple outward. His own cooperation and patience had contributed to a positive outcome. The chief's intervention had prevented potential escalation. Even the bystanders who had witnessed the encounter were impacted. They saw an example of fairness, human respect, and thoughtful leadership in action. He understood that ordinary people, officers and leaders alike, are part of a shared human story, influencing each other in subtle and meaningful ways. Later that evening, he walked through the neighborhood park, reflecting on what had happened. Families were out for evening strolls, dogs were being walked, and the sounds of distant laughter filled the air. It struck him how easy it is to overlook the lessons hidden in ordinary life. The encounter had taught him patience, the value of calm communication, and the power of authority used wisely. These were lessons that went beyond police encounters. They applied to work relationships, community interactions. The man also thought about the officers again, realizing that they had likely learned something from the experience too. They had seen the chief's approach firsthand, observed how patience and clarity could prevent tension, and witnessed the positive effect of treating people with respect, even in potentially stressful situations. He imagined them applying these lessons in future encounters, influencing how they interacted with countless others. In a small but meaningful way, the impact of that single day would extend far beyond him. The story he had experienced began to feel. It's like a thread connecting him to a larger community. He thought about neighbors, friends, and even strangers, realizing that everyone's actions carry weight. How he responded, how the officers responded, and how the chief guided the situation were all parts of a shared human experience. Each choice, each moment of calm, patience, or understanding contributed to outcomes that shaped not only the present, but also the lessons people carry forward. That evening, he shared the story with a close friend over a phone call. He described the sequence of events, the arrival of the police chief, and the way the situation had shifted from ordinary to remarkable. He didn't dramatize it. He spoke honestly about the tension, the relief, and the lessons learned. His friend listened quietly and remarked on how much could be learned from a moment that might have seemed routine or unimportant. The man agreed, realizing that life often hides its most meaningful lessons in moments that appear simple on the surface. As he prepared for bed that night, he reflected quietly on the journey from confusion to clarity. The encounter had begun as a minor routine situation, but had grown into something profoundly human. It had revealed the importance of calm presence, respectful communication, and the guidance of thoughtful leadership. He realized that even ordinary days hold opportunities to learn, grow, and see the world in a clearer, more empathetic way. He thought again about the police chief. The chief had done more than resolve the immediate situation. He had modeled a way of being in the world. Calm, observant, patient, and fair, those qualities had transformed a small encounter into a meaningful lesson. The man understood now that leadership isn't just about giving orders. It's about guiding, teaching, and showing respect for the humanity in every person, even in moments that seem small or routine. Over the following days, he found himself approaching daily life differently. Minor frustrations no longer seemed overwhelming. Small misunderstandings were met with patience. Conversations were handled with more thought and care. The encounter had changed the way he saw interactions with others, showing him the value of listening, empathy, and understanding. Even when nothing appears urgent or dramatic, the man also thought about the ripple effect beyond himself. The officers had learned from the chief, and he had learned from both the officers and the chief. The bystanders who had observed the encounter likely carried their own impressions. Quietly noticing the calm resolution and respect demonstrated, it was a reminder that even brief interactions can leave impressions that shape attitudes, behaviors, and expectations far into the future. Finally, he recognized that the story wasn't just about a police encounter. It was about human connection, the importance of remaining composed in difficult situations, in the way leadership can inspire respect and understanding. It was a story about ordinary people navigating unexpected challenges, and how thoughtful actions, small gestures of patience, fairness, and clarity can make a difference that lasts. As he turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, he felt a sense of peace. The encounter had started with tension and uncertainty, but ended with clarity and reflection. He understood now that the ordinary moments of life are full of potential, the chance to act with patience, to learn from others, and to observe the human qualities that make a difference in the world. The day would remain with him, not as a source of fear or stress, but as a reminder that calm, respect, and thoughtful leadership can transform ordinary encounters into lasting lessons. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet of the night surround him. The lessons of the day settled in his mind. Stay calm, listen carefully, act with understanding, and respect the humanity in others. He knew that these were lessons that would carry him forward in life, shaping his interactions, his perspective, and his appreciation for the moments that often go unnoticed but are full of meaning. In the end, what had started as a routine encounter had become a story of human connection, insight, and the enduring power of calm and fair leadership.